This is my good side.
Well, I'm left-handed. Wow, thank you. Good night. Hi, everyone. How are you? How do actors do this?
I know. There's actually light out there too. We can see you a little bit.
Can you hear me okay? Because I'm a little soft-spoken. So, my name's Corey Roskin. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to interview Laura Stearns, our special guest. And for those of you who don't know me, I live in the community. I'm involved with a number of different projects with the library and the cultural center. I've worked with authors in different ways for many years, and Laura asked me if I would interview her, and I was thrilled for the opportunity. One, because I like her a whole lot. And two, even before I read the books, I knew a little bit about them, and I was quite intrigued. And if you haven't had a chance to read one or both, they're both available for purchase afterwards. And we are going to focus on the current book more than the first one, but we'll touch upon that a little bit. So I'm going to introduce Laura a little bit formally. It's only a few sentences, don't worry. This is Laura Stearns, who's an award-winning actor and director, co-founder of the Minnesota Theater Accountability Coalition, and co-author of the Minnesota Theater Standards for Safety and Accountability. Her testimony at the state legislature supported the removal of the criminal statute of limitations for rape victims in the state of Minnesota. Yep. That deserves a round of applause.
It does.
Sure.
Not me, just the fact that it happened.
Yeah. She is also the author of the memoir, Shattered, exposing the open secret of the children's theater scandal, which is her first book, and the book that we'll be mostly talking about tonight, which is Daring to Heal, Growing Beyond Trauma Through Awareness, Acceptance, and Action. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Corey.
How do you feel about being here?
I feel really good, and I'm just like a little overwhelmed that so many people showed up because I'm new to town. So it's really, I'm so grateful that you're here. Really, there's so many theater people here that I love and adore, and I really appreciate you showing up for me. So, and then everybody else who I haven't met yet, because there's some people here who I haven't met. I look forward to meeting you afterwards.
Yeah. Well, this is going to include some difficult subject matter.
Should we change the slide?
We're going to change.
I made a PowerPoint.
She made a PowerPoint.
I did.
Don't worry, this isn't going to be like stuffy.
It's not. It's
So
not at
even
all.
though some of the PowerPoints will have little bullet points. It won't be stuffy. So, do you want to talk about the first slide?
Yeah. One of the things I did with my first book was I put little sort of trigger warnings throughout it because there's a lot of talk of trauma, and I just wanted to take care of the readers. And myself too, because I wanted to frame it in a way that really held it with care. And so what I want you to do tonight is to hold yourself with care, because we're going to talk about some things that are going to be possibly triggering. And I just want y'all to know you're not alone, and that if you need to talk to somebody, there's all kinds of people here. I'm happy to talk to people afterwards. And if you need to leave, you can. Don't feel. I will not feel offended if people feel like they need to take care of themselves, even if it's just a bodily fluid adjustment.
Well, we've locked the doors. Well, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. So before we get into the new book, which just came out a few weeks ago, let's do a little bit of a backdrop for everybody and maybe talk about the first book, Shattered, and how that came about, because really once you wrote that, this was sort of the next step in the process. And I know it's deep and intense.
It's deep, but it's also like I could talk for hours on just that subject in and of itself. So you got to keep me moving. So the memoir was born of a desire for information to be shared regarding this, what we refer to as an open secret, which is what happened at Children's Theater back in the 80s. And I was a student there at the time, and there was a lot of harm happening, and nobody really knew the extent of it until 2015. It's 2013, there was a Child Victims Act written into law in the state of Minnesota. I think Minnesota was the third or the fourth state that did that. California might have even been the first. And what that did was opened a window, a retroactive window for people who had suffered childhood abuse, that they could litigate against the institution or the person who had harmed them. So to me, when I heard about that, that was all about the churches, the church kids, right? And I just didn't think of it in terms of something that would make a difference in my life. But in 2015, everything sort of came to a head, and a lot of people started telling their stories within our very small community of the Children's Theater. And after a lot of information started coming out, because of the investigation that was happening there were 17 of us who actually came forward and filed lawsuits. It could have been hundreds, literally, but that's part of the issue with trauma, especially when it happens to children, is people don't even recognize that harm happened to them, and sometimes it takes decades for that. And I saw a statistic recently that was the average age of disclosure for an adult who had suffered childhood abuse was the age of 52. So that gives you a sense of just what it means to, you hold this and people don't really understand. Hi, come on in, sit wherever you want. So people hold that and they don't ever necessarily understand what they're holding. So for the memoir, all of this information was being discovered through disclosure for the trials and for the litigation. And this was an unbelievable amount of information that was gathered. And I kept going, who's going to write the book? I really wanted the information to be out there. And I knew that not everything would get it into the courtroom, even if we got into the courtroom, which we ended up doing. But there was just so much happening. And part of the problem is when people are going back in time and dredging up painful memories, they don't want to be talking about it in public. I was able to because I've been doing therapy for a couple of decades. And so I was in a position where I felt like I could actually hold the story publicly. And that was why I chose to come forward. I got this glare cone, I'm just going to take these off. That's why I chose to come forward, not anonymously, but with my name. And so in the theater community in Minneapolis, I had been working for decades and I was a known entity. So that was kind of a huge deal when someone as public as I was came forward and said that. It made people listen. And this theater company is still in existence. The school is no longer there, but the theater is still there. And there's a whole lot of stuff that happened. So the memoir, I took 2 years to just research. My own stuff is in there, my own story and the telling of my story, but I researched in order to, I didn't want to put anything out in public that didn't have some grounds for, I just wasn't I'm not gonna make things up, right? It has to have a paper trail. There has to be, so everything that's in the book is stuff that was discovered through discovery, were things that were spoken to me directly and that I had permission from people to talk about. So it's a pretty extensive memoir, and there's a timeline in the back of it that shows all of the stuff that was happening. The person who was in charge there was actually basically a known pedophile. He was first arrested in 1961 and became the head of this theater company in 1965. So it's like, it was just a disaster waiting to happen. So I don't know, is there any more that you want to hear about that?
That was great. I don't use the word brave a lot because I think it's so overused, but I think it was quite brave of you to do this, and you were in situations where you were not only traumatized, but you were re-traumatized a number of times, and you suffered under the assault of other people numerous occasions.
Yeah, well, my personal experience as a child, I was assaulted 4 times before I was 20. I was raped 4 times before I turned 20. So that's one of the things that will happen, especially with children, is that will happen and they become more likely, statistically, you're more likely to be assaulted after you've been assaulted once. So, and then I think the statistics now are children between the ages of 7 and 13 are the most at risk. And I was 10 the first time I was assaulted, so I'm sort of right in that little pocket. And thank you. I mean, the brave is yes, and does take a lot to be able to stand up and talk about this stuff. And to me, I have a hard time with hearing that word in particular, brave, because it brings Conan the Barbarian to mind for me, and I'm like, that's not me. So I'm actually kind of looking for myself. What does that mean to be brave? And to me, I was always like, I did what needed to be done. I said what needed to be said, because I could. So if that's brave, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, what would you say it was? Would you have a word for it, or how did you feel coming forward and that people started to respond to it and that you took action?
I mean, I guess I like the word courage, because the bravery to me says more like fearless, which I don't necessarily think they correlate completely, but that I get gladiator, and to me, courage is the stuff of survivors, and that you can continue to walk forward and be afraid. And that's what courage is to me. So.
Yeah, I like that. So you wrote this book, and then you ended up writing another book,
right.
which we're going to talk about today. And in the first book, you talk a lot about what happened and all the specifics about what happened in the school, your trauma, etc. And there is some inspiration there as well. But the second book, you really start to take us into your journey to healing and some of the different things that you've done to heal. And do you want to move on to the next slide just to start talking about it? Because in the beginning of the book, yeah, I think that's okay. Well, there's two sections of the book, Transforming Negative Thinking and Transforming Culture. So let's start to talk about that first section of the book, Transforming Negative Thinking. And you start by talking specifically about trauma and defining it, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I first sat down and I wrote out everything I could think of that I wanted to share with people. And I brought it to my publisher, and he said, Laura, this is 2 books. And I didn't want it to be 2 books, I really wanted it to be 1, because there's so much in the memoir that is very heavy, and I did not want to leave people without some way to take care of themselves. That's one of the reasons why I kind of wove that into the memoir, so that I continue to remind people, don't forget, if you're dysregulated, and there's a description of what dysregulated is. If this is happening to you, please take time, take a break, whatever. So I do that throughout the memoir, but I wanted what's in Daring to Heal to be woven into the memoir as well. But my publisher wasn't having it. And that's fine. I'm actually happy because it did now it's 2 separate things. And I think this book it's not just about healing from sexual violence, it's healing from trauma. And trauma comes in many shapes and forms. And I tried to write a book that really spoke to the common humanity of that and not the specific genesis of the trauma. I do talk about the genesis of mine, and I continue to talk about that, but I always try to make sure that people understand that it's a universal tool that I've presented.
Yeah, and if you don't buy both books, let's say, and you just buy the current book, there is a lead up to everything you talk about that catches you up on.
I do a little mini, like, here's the previously on the episode, so I bring people up to speed a little bit. And in the first book, I do a condensed version of what I do in the second book, which is to explain what trauma is. I do just like this little version in the first one, and then I try to go in. So here's what I did, really. I wrote the book I wanted. I wanted to have a book that would give me access to information about what was going on with me so that I could understand this thing, trauma, and I didn't want to keep getting sucked into all of this other stuff that was involved with the other books that I was reading. For instance, The Body Keeps the Score is an amazing book by Bessel van der Kolk, and he's like the leading guy in trauma research, and it's a beautiful book, and it took me over a year to read it, because I'd pick it up, I'd read a few pages, and then I couldn't touch it again for a month. So I wanted a book where I could get as much information as I needed to understand a specific thing, and that it wasn't going to drag me around into a bunch of stuff that I just didn't feel like I could handle.
What did you, like, if you had to, I'm not going to ask you to do the elevator pitch because it's more complicated than
Yeah.
that. But if you had to talk about, what is trauma, what did you find out, what would you want to impart to people in a short way?
Right, well, so the nutshell is,
Uh-oh.
trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. It is completely human for everybody to react to events in our lives in ways that make us feel like this shouldn't be happening this way, or that I'm broken, or for instance, I give this example in the book. If there's a burning building, I'm running towards it. I don't freeze, I go into fight mode. And if somebody comes up to me at a bar and gets in my space, I freeze. So those are both, the reaction in the bar is largely because I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and that I tend to freeze because of it. But we all respond to trauma in different ways. If you're in a car crash, two people in the same car, same exact circumstance, one can walk away and be shook up, and the other one could be comatose. Like, it doesn't matter. It's what you bring to that experience is how it's going to color the way you move through it. And that's a huge piece, because one of the things at Children's Theater that was big for a lot of people was so many people were being harmed, and we were all young, and there were some people in the community who were going, well, that happened to me. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of it. And it was like, yeah, well, maybe that's true. Maybe you haven't discovered what's really going on. And if you really are okay, you didn't necessarily show up to that experience with what I showed up with. I was assaulted at the age of 10, and somebody else at the age of 15, which is the next time I was assaulted. Had they not been assaulted at the age of 10, they would react to it in a really different way. So that's what I want people to understand in the describing trauma, is the different ways that it shows up. There's different forms of trauma, there's different levels of it, there's different things that happen to us. Some people suffer from PTSD, and even that has layers. I have complex PTSD, so that's like, because my harm is really complex. So I suffer from complex trauma, not just a traumatic event. There's acute, compound, and complex. So we all have these different layers of things that are difficult in our lives, and how do they layer on top of each other? That's really what, we're all going to respond a little bit differently because of that.
So you have done many things to work through that, work with it, I'm going to say, because it probably never leaves completely. But should we start to talk a little bit about some of the techniques that you learned, what brought you to things that you write about in the book?
Yeah.
The next one is awareness.
We did this, yeah. All right, so I want to talk about the first time I was in therapy. I was 29 the first time I actually went to try and do some deep trauma healing. And I went to a therapist who was the wrong kind of therapist, I come to find later, but at the time I just went to whoever I could find. And I was digging up a lot of memories and trauma from what had happened to me at Children's Theater. Number one, I don't think she believed me, because what was happening there was so crazy. It just was like, that's not real. And I've had a lot of people say that they've tried to share with their experiences with their therapist and they think they're lying. So there was that. And then I would bring up all of this stuff, which was really hard to bring up, and then I'd look at her and go, and she'd say, well, that sounds like it was very difficult. And I'd go, yeah. And then I go, what do I do with it? And then she says, well, what do you think you should do with it? And I'm like, should I punch you in the face? That's what I really want to do. But I wasn't getting what I needed from the people who were supposedly trained to help me. So I went on a journey of finding a lot of different information to develop a process for myself, which is what this book is about, is the process of of healing from trauma. And it comes in a lot of different layers, but the first piece is acceptance. It's awareness. And so that's part of the digging up of everything, and we will all go through different layers or different ways of discovery of what it is that we're holding. Sometimes people will have things so buried and they don't remember it, especially if it happened to you as a child. That can come up later in life, and then it's a whole other stuff when it comes up later. So the awareness piece is the first of the 3 A's. And it's kind of like you can't have the other one. You can't have acceptance unless you know what you're accepting, right? So it's like they have to go in that order: awareness, acceptance, and action. And so what I wanted to do with the book when I first was deciding to write it as a separate thing, I wanted to present my concerns, my issues, and my process through this lens of the 3 A's. And then I wanted to step back and look at how that works in the world. How can we take this tool of awareness, acceptance, and action and look at how we participate in society so that we can shift the culture away from rape culture and towards a culture of consent. And so I wanted that to be part of the book as well, so that if people are wanting things that they can do that are not just either, I give a list of things that you can do for yourself, and there's processes and things that you can practice. But at the end of the second part of the book, which is transforming culture, I have 10 things you can do right now to transform culture, to dismantle rape culture. So because I'm that one who's like, give me something to do. I want that, and so I'm giving you something to do for yourself and also for how you move through the world.
Well, I mean, therapeutic work is so fascinating because, it's so different for so many different people. And you are very action-oriented. And in a way, you kind of created your own set of action steps from things that it sounded like you were learning along the way, maybe taking bits and pieces from, 12 steps.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of different things. And I'd read a book and I'd go, oh, that kind of fits with what I want to be doing. And so over probably 20 years, I pulled from these different books that I was reading or different processes I was trying. And there's probably nothing in this book that's brand new. It's a different way of saying what you may have heard a dozen times or 20 times or a million times, but I'm hopefully saying it in a way that it will get through. Because we all have the way, we have our lenses that we look through, and hopefully I'm saying these things in a way and packaging these different practices in a way that makes sense. Because sometimes you'll be given something to do and you're like, I have no idea what to do with this. So I try to do it in very specific process. Here's the first layer. If you're going to do acceptance, I just want to see what I did next.
Let's see what comes after.
Oh, what do I believe? Yeah, so that's... There are a lot of people, especially those of us who tend to be caretakers. If you're harmed as a child, you tend to be a caretaker. We don't always know what we even think. So what do I believe? Usually I believe whatever my parents believed, or I believe what's sort of been fed to me. And sometimes people quite literally don't know what they're thinking. And for me, because I've been doing this work for so long, I can tell you. But I do remember that time when someone would say, what do you think? And I go, because I just didn't have access to it. I was so numb from what had happened to me. And what our brains do is try to help us, try to keep us from being in pain. So for me, part of my mechanism was to forget and to just sort of feather all the edges and make it all look really pretty, or just, I don't even remember it happening. So,
that was self-protection for you.
Absolutely, yeah, that's how it works. I mean, our brains do what it can to take care of us. The problem is those coping mechanisms at some point stop working. And the age of 52 being the time frame that people tend to disclose from child abuse, like that, it's really like it kind of is amazing that happens. And a lot of us who were at Children's Theater, we were in that time frame of early 50s, And fascinatingly enough, it was when our own children were at the ages that we were when we were harmed. So you start to look at the child and go, oh, wait a minute, that's me, but I didn't realize that I looked like that or that I was that vulnerable. So that's what happens is like something will come up, pull up these memories, and then what do you do with that? So that's what I'm trying to do. The book is like, what do I do with it? Here's something to do with the things that come up.
So what happens once you start to look at, what do I believe, what do I think? After that comes...
What's next? Dun, 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 dun. What do I say? Kitty, true, false. So, oh my gosh, so false core beliefs. So I go through a pretty intensive process of teaching you how to identify false core beliefs. And a false core belief is basically the thing that you believe. Positive beliefs are, I'm great. Positive beliefs are, I can do anything and I'm going to succeed. A false core belief looks more like, I'm broken and I can't be fixed. And that's how I felt. That was the label I gave myself. The core belief was that I'm broken and I can't be fixed. Another one is I'm stupid. Like those, they're so basic. And nobody can identify your false core belief for you. And sometimes there's a variation on the theme, even for me. I talk about my different core beliefs, and then I've got a couple of them that are like fill in the blank. Like, I'm not blank enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not. And so what I do is take the reader through some exercises to try and help identify those things for you. So that's the thoughts that's going on under the surface. And if you want to progress towards action, you've got to figure out what's going on underneath. So what do I think? If you don't know what you're thinking, you've got to figure out what you're thinking. What do I believe? What are those deep beliefs that I have been embedded in me, usually since childhood? We show up on the planet looking to everybody around us to see if we're okay. You reach for the hot stove and you see if mom goes, so we're trained to look outside of ourselves. We're not trained to look inside. We're trained to look outside to see if we're okay. So this tool is to help you find that way of looking inside to find your truth, not what somebody else fed to you when you were a child.
And then you developed, I know this is a few slides down, but you developed a set of techniques to deal with that, which is sort of a 4-step technique called the right
thinking,
process, which maybe we can kind of go quickly through the next couple and get to that.
So this just really quickly, layers of acceptance. There's so many things that get in the way of us accepting what's true. And just even up at the top, I talk about what do I find unacceptable, and the second one is accept the reality as true without emotional attachment, remembering that you don't need to like something to accept the reality of it. And that's hard for a lot of people because for me, sometimes acceptance, if I accept something, it means I'm giving up or I'm letting the other thing win. Like, I'm really upset with the way my mother died. I have every right to be pissed about it. And I feel like if I give up that right, then I'm saying it's okay that she died the way she died. And that's not what this is. So that's what these layers of acceptance is all about, like figuring out what's going on underneath. And then, so things that stop us from being in action: fear, perfectionism, the positive, negative. It's too much to go into here, but I will tell you, I have spent my life from a very small age sort of paralyzed by perfectionism. And I'm sure we could talk a lot about just that topic in and of itself. But I was saying to you when we talked about it in the lobby, because so there's a cake out there. There will be cake. So when I went to pick up the cake, and should I say where it is? Okay, it was Albertsons. So I'm just going to call them out. So they open it up, and the frosting around the edge looks like shit. And then it's the cover of the book. So it's like this beautiful thing, and then there's a little smudge on the side. And my first reaction is like, oh, that's not good enough, right? And then there's two things that happen for me. One, I don't want to be a bother, so I'm not going to ask them to fix it. That's the first thought. Don't bother anybody. Terrible. And then the second thought was, 10 years ago, maybe even, I would never have, like, this was so unacceptable to me. I would be like, I would have come here, gotten some frosting after, I would have gone to the, I would have like been, pulling all the frosting off and redoing it, like literally, because that's my perfectionism is so deep. And what did I do, Corey? Nothing. I went, okay, it's a cake. We're going to eat it, and it's going to be great. And so that's that's how I show up today. Is something that can be really, really wrong doesn't throw me into a tizzy. I'm actually okay. It's a sort of simple example of progress, but it's real.
A good example, and I thought about it a little bit afterwards because I said to Laura, "Oh, that would really bother me." But that's partly because I would lean into like, "Oh, it's okay, everything's okay," and that's not always good, even though sometimes it works fine for me. So it is interesting how our reactions and how we learn to maybe look at things differently.
Yeah.
So
should we go to another one?
Let's get to the right thinking process because I think that is like
Oh no! How did that happen? That jumped like what the heck?
Don't look at that. Oh.
Okay, this is the one. Right thinking.
There
Yay.
it is. Because this is really kind of what you're ultimately getting
Yeah.
to in terms of all the work that you've done to get to a place where you have found probably different techniques, but this is a key technique that has helped you in your process of healing.
Yeah, and this is a combination of a bunch of different things that I've pulled together, and it's a process I do for myself. And when I was thinking about it for the book, what do I want to call this thing? I can't just go, oh, it's just processing. It's like, call it a thing. So I knew it was a 4-step thing and decided that I would call it right thinking because I like the idea of ritual. And so that felt like a good name for it. So R is recognize the thought. I identify the false core belief, which you do earlier in the book. T turn around the thinking. Is that how it is? Yeah, turn around. Tell yourself the truth. Tell yourself the truth, which is really hard to do alone. And then engage with a response. So it's 4 very clear directions. And I go through earlier in the book I hope really thoroughly how you do each one of these things so that when you get there, and I give a lot of examples. I had a horrible day in COVID, like one of the, maybe 2 months in. I had one of those days where nothing was right. And over the years, I have developed this process that I just do it in my head. I don't have to sit and write it out. That sounded very Minnesotan. Out. Write it out. I'm from Minnesota. What can I say? So, that particular day could not pull myself out of it. It was so dark. So I wrote every thought I could think of, and it was like 20 thoughts, and they were so like bad. And I share them in the book. And I don't share all of them because it would just be like meandering all over the place. But I share a lot of the ones that I felt that most people could relate to. And I go through each one of those with this process so that you can see the different layers with each one of those examples. Is there a good example? Or would you like me to come up with something and you could guide me through? You can come up with something. What it would be. Okay, recognize that he thought, I don't know, I'm a terrible person. Okay, what would you say? What would your next step be? So that's kind of, it ties into, that's a false core belief, right? I mean, that could be a false core belief. But if you have something happen in your life, the guy cut me off in traffic. Okay, I'm pissed at this guy who cut me off in traffic. Okay, so that's a pretty, it's not fun to have that happen. Yeah. So what's underneath that event? The false core belief is what? And then you can go through, if you know what, because we've done them earlier in the book, we've identified. So that could be something like, nobody sees me. I'm invisible. That could be a false core belief. So that might tie into that. So then the next one would be to tell yourself the truth. So what is the truth? Are you invisible? No, of course you're not invisible. You're right here. We can see you. He's right here, and he's handsome and lovely. So that's the tell yourself the truth. And then take an action. So that's a hard piece. It depends on everybody's has a different way of feeling like they're doing something that pulls them out of a deep, dark place. For me, it's almost always reaching to somebody in my life to tell them I love them, to, hey, let's go out and have coffee. Like, I do something, and so I pull myself out of that thinking. And sometimes it's a very specific action that I may think, who in my life have I been treating or have not been paying attention to? Who have I not said I love you enough to lately? So I will take that thing that was I'm not being seen, and I will make myself see somebody to turn it around. Make sense?
Do you find that you do these pretty often with things that come up? Is this
All the time.
All the time?
All the time,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't write them out as much. When I get into, and I do get into very dark places, I suffer from clinical depression. Most people would not think that because I'm a friendly person. I've got a lot of energy, and I'm also an introvert. So I just don't present the way that of what's really going on inside of me. So when I have told some people, and maybe even people in this room, some of the darker stuff that's going on with me, they're like, wow. I mean, they just don't buy it because it's like, you're so, energetic and happy. And I'm like, yeah, but what's really going on underneath it all is I don't deserve. I don't deserve to be treated well. I don't deserve to have money. I deserve to be treated like shit. So if that's the core belief, everything that's layered on top of that doesn't have, it's on a solid foundation. What I want to do is take that solid foundation of I'm broken or I'm whatever it is and remove the foundation so that the rest of the stuff has nothing to live on. Yeah?
So you have found this technique that works for you and that has taken time for you to develop, a lot of work on yourself, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of reading, all that kind of stuff. And you then go into the second part of the book where you start to talk about transforming culture.
Yeah.
And I want to see if we can somehow connect this with how you weave into that, because in some ways it seems like, oh my God, transforming culture.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Why you decided to do that and how that relates to.
Yeah. It occurred to me when I was writing out the 3 A's for my process that it applies to so many different things and that you could just pull the lens back a little bit and get a wider picture. And that for me, for the core of my trauma is rape culture supports sexual violence, and we all support it in ways. Even those of us who are survivors, we still support rape culture by being silent sometimes. So rape culture is the way in which we participate in our lives, the way we talk to each other. There are social constructs and social contracts that we all have sort of signed on to. They weren't something we signed our name onto, but we accepted them as part of our family, part of the neighborhood we grew up in, whatever. And so what we're trying to do is take those, it's part of that belief system. The social constructs and the social contracts are very similar to false core beliefs. So a social contract would be waiting for everybody to get off the bus before you get on, right? That's just something that we all do, and that's actually a really good social contract. And then there are some where one is like, you don't say anything out loud when you hear somebody tell a rape joke because it's uncomfortable, and we go, did I just hear what I just heard? And you kind of go, and so that's it's a core belief within society that we don't call people out on this. But if we don't, we're participating in the perpetuation of that particular element that supports degradation of women, children, disabled, people of color, all, like the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I was actually thinking about that a little bit today because I knew there'd be a lot of people from creative world and theater and so forth.
Yeah.
And how in that environment, there's so much intimacy and there's so much connection, and often there's a requirement for literal,
Physical contact, intimacy, yeah,
contact
yeah.
and so forth. And the ways that that's starting to transform, whether it's bringing in intimacy coordinators or whether it's just being clear from the get-go and developing a new contract.
Right.
Here's what I'm comfortable with, here's what I'm not.
There's a lot of unhealthy contracts in theater that have just been there sort of since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
And where I think now, since Me Too, that reckoning has allowed people to have a voice, and they're starting to call those things out. Now, it does, in some ways, has shifted onto the opposite direction. And people are like, I don't want you to, like, there's a different thing that's going on with some people in theater that's like, the pendulum has just swung the other direction. We've been over here where like nobody's being accountable for anything that they're doing in theater. And then you're over here where people are like, I'm so terrified to even audition because I don't want people to be treating me poorly, so they aren't even auditioning. Or, it's really, like, it's very strange, but there's a lot going on around the consent within society because of Me Too, and then that's transferred into, like, the intimacy coordination, intimacy direction, and the different things. And I do talk about that in the book, the different distinctions and the differences between what it means to be dating somebody in the world and working on a love scene in a play. There's different sets of agreements that you have to abide by in those two different environments. So I do make some pretty clear distinctions between those.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look at that in the work environment, because it is a work environment when you think about it. I worked in social services for City of West Hollywood for years, and we used to do some HIV prevention campaigns, and there were some pretty explicit issues. And there were always questions about, like, what can we post at work, what can we put out there, and so it involved that, and it was necessary, but it's, I think careful conversation with respect goes a long way.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you want to flip through some of this stuff and we could
what do we
talk
have
a little
next?
bit about more what happens
So transforming
in that
culture
section of the book? You do give us some pretty dramatic statistics about
I'll just leave that up and people can consume it in whatever or not. But it's like pandemic numbers. I mean, it's really, really horrible what's happening on the planet. And we're not paying attention to it. And why? Because rape culture does not support us paying attention to it. So it does not want us to pay attention to it. It wants us to just keep pretending nothing's wrong. And what happens is children continue to be abused. Women continue to be abused at terrifying rates. Women of color, Indian women, did you know that they are the most likely to be assaulted? They have the highest numbers. American Indian or Native American women are the ones who have the highest numbers of sexual violence. And trans as well. Okay, I'm gonna say something, I'm gonna call this out right here and right now. I was going through my book to make sure that all of the links were working when I was making the Kindle version, and I clicked on a link that had to do with a statistic around trans violence, or violence against trans people. And I clicked on the link, and it went to basically an empty page. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? I look at the I'm clicking blindly because it's lit up. I click on it, right? And I go, which one is this? Oh, violence against trans people. It happened to be the Department of Justice, victims of VOC, victims of crime. So victims of crimes. So the Department of Justice Victims of Crime page, and it now says page not found. Because the Trump administration took that page down. And I decided to leave that in my book so people can click on that source themselves and see that page is still, that's what it says. Those numbers are being hidden. So what is that? Rape culture, right?
How do we use the right process to deal with that?
Oh my, we need like industrial strength. I'll tell you, it is really hard.
Yeah. Do you? I'm going off the thing just
That's
a
okay.
tiny bit. Do you think that if this is an obvious question away, but maybe not. If there were more sort of healthy discussions with adults, with young people from early on about sexuality, about intimacy, about all of that, that is part of what could help transform that. And obviously in some families that does happen, but in
Yes.
so many it doesn't at all.
No, it doesn't. And the fact that our Department of Education is being dismantled is absolutely terrifying. So if you're not having these conversations in family, that kind of education that's been happening in public schools is not going to be happening anymore. So that's just going to make people even more vulnerable. Okay, we could go on and on. I don't want to go there because we'll all get really depressed. But what was the question?
That was good. That's good. Well, I just wonder if there were more in the family systems.
Yeah.
If there were more conversations with parents who have young children.
So,
about
yes,
discussing
absolutely.
sexuality.
Not even just discussing it, but here's what the key thing to me. If you want to take one thing away for how can I live in the world differently and help children, treat them with respect, listen to them, and respect their boundaries. And don't insist that a child conform to your idea of what they should be doing. Don't make them go kiss Uncle Jimmy when they don't want to. Because what that does is takes their autonomy away. It takes their agency away. So from us, as a small child, I have a friend who has, I think she's 4 or 5 now, and she did this with her daughter. And of course, it's maddening because they're like, you don't get to touch me. But to a degree, it's like, no, you're right. So if I can't touch you, I can't give you dinner. And they go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I guess I should get in my bath, right? So, but it's actually talking to children in a way that allows them to know that they're human beings and not just little objects, right? That's a very small thing, but that's a way that you can right now treat children differently in every space.
I agree. Do you want to whip through these last two, and then do we have some time? We could
Yes,
take a couple.
I'm happy to
as well.
answer things. Okay, so here,
Yeah.
this is rape culture. This is some of the things that, there's a long list of what sexual violence includes. I put those because I wanted people to understand that that picture where he's just lifting her hair, that's sexual harassment. That's kind of what that looks like. It's a way that it can look. It doesn't have to be, I'm lifting up your skirt and groping you. So revenge porn, that's one that's not necessarily on every list. Messaging, this is part of what we're talking about, how we talk to children, that's what I was just talking about. The messaging where do we put our money? What kind of movies are we paying for? What kind of television are we watching? And what kind of media are we consuming on the internet, magazines, newspaper, whatever? Pay attention to what you're doing. And there can be some really great shows that have strong female characters, and then they're sandwiched between misogynistic shows that like, okay, well, great, but now it's just, it's a shit sandwich. So, and the message, and the commercials, can be this great, woman who's super independent, and Olivia Pope or whoever you want to think of, and then you've got these derogatory commercials that surround it. So that's what I'm talking about, is paying attention to those things, and I don't know how we change it right now. It's just paying attention and not supporting it in whatever way. Don't give people your money if you don't have to, that are doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then finally, we have one more slide. I think we started to touch on this.
Yay! Yeah, so consent culture. I don't always do that. I do it with people I don't know, but the people that I do know, I've got some of my best friends in the world sitting here in the front row. And when I go to see them, I very rarely go, can I give you a hug? Because I know that I can hug you. We just do. That's part of our dynamic. But I try to always ask people if I can give them a hug. Is it okay if I touch you right now? Thank you for being here. Like that. It's just so simple. And if somebody says, can I touch you right now? And you go, I'm not okay with that. Super cool. Thank you for being here. You're awesome. Like, you just adjust. You don't have to make somebody wrong for holding a boundary. right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. I had a whole side life, aside from my regular career, and I taught yoga classes for 10 years, and I would adjust people sometimes. And one time I went just very subtly on a woman on her back to adjust her, and she got quite upset.
Yeah.
And I realized I should have checked and said, is it
Yeah.
okay if I adjust you?
And now we have permission to be upset. Before, women would just go and be quietly, scrunching and doing that. And now we're like, I'm not okay with this, which is great. So.
Yeah, and I was a really kind of genteel little teacher. I mean, there was a pretty aggressive teacher.
Right, but if you had somebody assault you when you were younger and they grabbed you by the neck, that can be very triggering to just have when somebody not, and you don't know that they're coming and all of a sudden you're being touched there, it can be really alarming.
No, absolutely. So before we take questions, there was one thing I noted in the book around consent, which I really liked, was there's a Planned Parenthood acronym, FREEZE. Do you remember that you mentioned in the book? Because I thought that really captured
Or it's FRIES, yeah.
FRIES. And I thought it really, in a series of words that became an acronym, sort of captured what you're talking about with consent.
So the acronym is called FRIES. It stands for Freely Given, Reversible, Informed, Enthusiastic, and Specific. And that you can find on the internet. Or wait a minute, you can buy my book and it's going to be in your hand.
I did that. This is gonna
And then there's a different acronym in theater because some of those things just don't apply. We talked about that earlier. So, yeah.
Cool.
I'm super curious if you guys have questions too, because I want to hear. This all lives in conversation to me.
I do too,
and I
have a whole list, but I think it's time we. I'll share those with you.
Okay. We can talk later.
Do we have any questions?
And I can see you if anybody wants to.
And this is a
throw
lot
it out
of
there.
theater people, so you could yell them out, or I could bring the mic. Anyone? If not, I have a couple more.
Jason.
Just an acknowledgement. I've done a lot of work on core beliefs and origin beliefs going way back, even to being birthed under negative circumstances. It's absolutely something that can be used, as you said earlier, in any circumstances where that kind of stuff shows up.
Yeah. I want to mention something.
Can you repeat the question?
It was a comment. And he was saying that the false core beliefs are applicable in so many different ways, that he was just wanting to mention that was something that he found very useful, even going way back in his life to very, very early on. Did I catch that enough? Did I say more? Okay.
Any others? A little hard to see.
Yeah.
Up front, and then we'll go back.
Is it appropriate to talk about the documentary?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Okay.
The documentary.
So the documentary, in 2019, so I went to trial against Children's Theater. They were found, just the nutshell version is, they were found negligent of harm in my case. They were not found liable, which is what? That's not normal, because the insurance companies wormed their way in there and got the judge to ask that as two questions. Normally, in any insurance case in a courtroom, if you're negligent, you're liable. Bottom line. So that didn't happen in my case. So then the theater turned around and tried to pull a thing called taxation of cost on me, which is basically the prevailing party, which they weren't really because they were found negligent. The prevailing party in a civil case is allowed to ask the losing party to pay for a portion of their legal fees. So the theater was going after me for almost $300,000 worth of their legal fees. And so I called bullshit and turned around and called for boycott. And that caused so much attention. It was like, in the city, who had been pretty complicit around this whole thing around Children's Theater for decades, people were paying attention. People left their jobs at Children's Theater. People were calling, we were boycotting, we were parading out in front with the signs and the whole thing. So what that did was brought attention to a documentary filmmaker named Nora Shapiro. And she decided that she wanted to make a documentary about what had happened at Children's Theater, and she followed us for 5 years, and there are a few of us that she follows, 4 of us in particular, There are other people in the documentary as well, but there's 4 in particular that were litigants in the cases against CTC. And so she followed us. She chose a very specific story that she wanted to tell, because you got to tell, it's a movie, you got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have enough information to do a 10-part series on Netflix, but you only have an hour and 45 minutes, so you have to pick what you're saying, right? So the documentary came out this last spring, and I flew back to Minneapolis to see it, and it was sold out immediately, and then the film festival tried to get the film pulled. And it turns out that some of the people who are on the board for the film festival were also on the board for children's theater. And they were trying to bury the film. So I think is that what you're getting at? So it's like this stuff is still happening. These institutions are still trying to bury their accountability, and it's happening all over the place, everywhere. So I'm the loudmouth. I'm the one who's going to call it out, and I will say that stuff. So I don't know what to do with that, other than that it's there, but it's making me feel like, what are other ways that I can be telling the story of what happened there and my story in a larger way? Because the film is, I'm going to tell you, if I had tried to do this in Minneapolis, I don't know that I would have had this kind of a turnout, because people wouldn't, at Eye on the Desert, thank you, Patrick Evans. He's a lovely human being. He had me on the show to promote this book. I couldn't get a single television station to promote my memoir. I couldn't get a newspaper, a magazine. Nobody would pick this story up because they're all so scared of the truth. And there's so many people in positions of power that are controlling the narrative. So anyway, that's the documentary. So hopefully the documentary will come out in a large scale, and you'll be able to see it, and maybe in a festival here. We could hopefully get it to come here, and hopefully it will be on, Netflix or something down the road, so you can see.
How about if there's 1 or 2 more?
There was some hands back there. I
saw
saw
one
earlier.
person in the back raise their hand.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, back there.
This is incredible, and I just love hearing your story. I'm curious, I kind of have 2 questions. I was curious, one, I was thinking about, you mentioned a little bit about the moment where you really started to find your voice and really started to acknowledge something was not right, and what, kind of that point for you. I can only imagine the courage that it took for you to start to speak up, even though you said you said at the time you had done a lot of work. When did you start to do that work for yourself? And then the other side of that is, how has this journey, how has it transformed you, and just in how you experience yourself today versus back then? When you kind of reflect on that process and that journey.
I'll start with that first. I love myself today. And I didn't want to be alive. 10 years ago, I didn't want to be on the planet. So I love myself today. I love the life I'm living. I am not perfect. I do not do everything perfectly. I mess up. I feel bad about myself, all that stuff. But bottom line, I love who I am. And so that's the first part of that. I could never have done any of what I did without my family, without my ex-husband, my children, my parents. When I first came forward and told my parents, because I didn't tell my parents what happened to me as a kid. I had to tell them because I was going to file a lawsuit. So I told them what had happened to me, and it's 30-year secret. And my dad, bless his heart, he's passed a few years now, but he said, go get the bastard. Right? Yeah, exactly. And so I could not have done what I have done without the support of friends and family, and also, in my particular circumstance, the community that was harmed at Children's Theater. We pulled together and we supported each other. The 17 of us that filed lawsuit, we became a little family, and we supported each other through that whole process. So my healing, or my trauma, a lot of it happened in community with what happened at CTC. So my healing has happened in community. That's not true for everybody, and that's not necessarily going to be what everybody needs. But that's what happened for me, because there was no other way to really dismantle all of the stuff without having the other people who had been there with me. Because I'm telling you, it was really nuts, and the people who were there are the only ones who really get it. So if I didn't have my relationship with those people, I don't know that I would have been able to do what I did. So, yeah.
Do we have one last question? I think there's one.
Yeah, I'd love to know, Laura, did you have negative repercussions from that institution, like smear campaigns, death threats, or any of that kind of thing from the powers that be, from them trying to take you down?
No, thankfully. Nobody came after me in any negative way. And I think largely because I was such a loudmouth that they couldn't. Like I would have just went, see what's happening, you know. So they didn't really bother me. They may have, I know there were some other people who got some negative things that had happened, but they didn't, I don't think they felt like they could with me. So, yeah. Anything else? I just want to point one thing out. Now, and Wayne, I think you're back there, yes? Wayne Bryant? Okay.
He had to leave because he had to go to the theater.
He had to go to the theater? Oh, hi, Craig.
Hi.
But I'm going to call him out even though he's not here. He did something for me a couple of months ago. Well, he helped me edit the book or do copy editing on the book, and it wouldn't be as beautiful as it is without him. But we were in a conversation with somebody. I'm not going to say who we were in conversation with because not appropriate. But anyway, this person said something that was very inappropriate. And Wayne, because I was going to ask him, is it because you read my book? But he went, that's not okay. And I was like, and I didn't say anything in the moment. I didn't go, thanks, Wayne. But I was going to do that right now because that's what happens with us too. We freeze. We get I don't know what just happened. Somebody just stood up for me. What do I do with that? You know? And then what you do with it is later you can always go back and go, remember that day? Thank you for that. Even though we don't always do it right in the moment. So we can always come back and fix the things that we've messed up.
So before we close, would you... we have a closing slide.
We have a closing slide. Thank you.
Wait, don't clap yet. Before we close, would you feel comfortable talking about your
The
tattoo
tattoos?
and what
Sure.
that represents?
Yeah.
And you talk
Yeah.
about that in the first book.
I do talk about it in the first
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
So the first tattoo I got was this one, and I was looking for a symbol that was for truth. And I couldn't find one, and I finally found one that was sort of it was a jewelry design, and I'm like, I liked it. It also happens to be my initials, LS. So I loved that. And then my next tattoo was this one, and it is 18 dragonflies. And this particular dragonfly, which is me, is sitting on an arrow, and it says peaceful warrior. And then the rest of the 17 dragonflies are for the other litigants, and then this one here is for those who couldn't speak. So they're with me all the time. They're with me every day. I see this tattoo every morning when I look at myself in the mirror, and I'm reminded of my history, what happened, and my gratitude for what I've been given today. And then over here I have, this is a heron in flight, and to me that is flying over water, so that to me is like spirit connection. And then down here is a frog, which is the transformation, moving from one thing to another, and then it's on the lilies behind it are for my mom. So there's all, everything that I put and do in my life, I try to have it have meaning. But that's what the tattoo is.
Particularly touched by
Yeah.
in the book when you talk about the other courageous
Yes.
warriors that came.
Yep.
So
Because some people, they just couldn't.
yeah.
They just couldn't.
Well, can we give a big round of applause for our courageous peaceful warrior over here?
Thank you, Corey. And I want to thank Corey for being willing to guide me through this conversation. So what we're going to do right now, this is, if you go on that QR code, it'll take you to my website, so you can learn a little bit more, go on some deep dives. Those are the two books. There are links to purchase the book there. And I also have several copies that I can sell out on. I have, I think, 6 copies of the memoir with me, and then plenty of copies of Daring to Heal. So you're welcome to purchase one from me tonight. I'm happy to sign them. And if you can't do that tonight, that's okay. you can always, come around to it another time.
And there is a near perfect cake out there
It's near perfect.
that I will be cutting. So come have some cake.
Yeah, and it's a big cake, so everybody can have a big piece. I didn't want to skimp.
All right.
All right, thank you so much for being here. Thanks.
Beautiful.
All right. Can I give you a
Yes,
hug?
you can. Oh, that was great. I hope you're
Thank you
happy
so
with
much.
that.
I am very happy. Thank you. You kept me on track. It worked good.
So much.
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Good job.
Love you guys.
Corey was perfect.
I know, isn't he just the
Corey's
best?
perfect.
That was fantastic.
Oh my God. Corey, excellent job.
Oh, thank you.
Oh my God, you're just a perfect. No, you really are. You're incredibly relaxing. You asked all the right
Yes.
questions.
Yeah.
You were like very engaging. You were wonderful. You need your own frickin' show.
When you have a good subject to
I know, but you guys clicked. It was wonderful. You need to just get that. When you see the video, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not just blowing smoke. Yeah, you'll see it. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm gonna go
No,
cut
good
cake.
job.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
cut cake.
Cut some cake.
Good job, Corey. You're such a thing that I
Oh yes, you are.
I haven't seen it. I'm not going to.
Let us eat cake.
Hello, how are you? Oh, I'm so glad you guys are
We're
here.
filming things.
No way.
How are you? Good to see you. I'm used to seeing you guys all the time, and now, like, it's been a couple of days.
It's been a couple of days. I know it's not right.
I'm having separation
I know, right? Yeah.
You. Fancy.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, I have a costume designer that designs me.
You met Salmi husband.
Hello. Hey, how are you?
How are you? Good to see you.
I took some pictures too from the back.
I'm sorry?
I took some pictures from the back that I can send to you.
Oh, good. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So you're getting
How are you?
five
of those.
So when I think they're all 12. Is that correct?
I sent him about 7 or 8 examples of what he wanted.
What?
There was a council meeting tonight.